Good mythical afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Ayala with another vlog for you. This is Unit 9, Section 3, the Federalist in Charge, also known as John Adams' presidency. As always, please make sure you are writing your notes that you need to be able to pass my test so that you can be successful and be awesome, just like everyone else. So, as always, make sure you're writing your notes and that you put your comments down in the doobly-doo or the discussion board or wherever I told you to put it this year. So as always, sit back, relax, write some notes, and view this as many times as you need to be successful. So to start with, we are going to be starting with how Washington begins to retire. So in his farewell address, Washington warns of two major things. One's of the ideas of political parties and how that would split the United States into various regions, and there'll be so much infighting. He was like, we are an Americans first, everything else second. And his next one is not to get involved in foreign wars, saying we are in a different continent, we are separated by two major oceans from most major powers in the world, we need to be left alone. We don't have the ability, and be getting into conflicts and agreements with other countries and alliances is just going to breed pain and suffering and a draining of our blood and treasure from this. And this all mostly deals with foreign policy in that, which is this relationship with other governments of other countries. So from there, the very first thing is that the Americans, we do the exact opposite of what Washington states. We always disagree with everything, and in particular how our nation should be run. So what happens is we make these political parties, and these political parties grew to help people spread their ideas and to actually influence their government either through the media, which at the time was mostly was newspapers and pamphlets, or through, the government itself by elections. So what we end up with a two-party system, and at the beginning of our two-party system, we have the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And they are two political parties that will disappear in about 30 to 40 years. So, for example, we have the Federalists on the left and the Democratic Party on the Democratic Republicans on the right. The Federalists are led by Alexander Hamilton. The Democratic Republicans, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The Federalists believe in a strong national government. National government is supreme, while the Democratic Republicans are like, no, the national government should have limited powers so that it does not take away our liberties. So the Federalists, they know what's going on in France. They see what mob rule did, like chop off the king's and queen's head, all these horrible things. So they're scared of that. While the Democratic Republicans are scared of a rule of one, like a monarchy or dictatorship, or a rule of a few powerful people like an oligarchy or corporations. From the left-hand side, we have a loose construction or interpretation of the Constitution. As we talked about in class, this is all this is about, is how you interpret the Constitution. They use the elastic clause, also known as the necessary and proper clause, to say, I can do anything I need to do to make the government run better. While the Democratic Republicans, of course, are the complete opposite. They have strict constructionalists. They believe in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, and if it doesn't say I can do it in the Constitution, I cannot do it as the national government. We also have the Federalists favoring national bank, Democratic Republicans opposing. Federalists, economy based on manufacturing and shipping. Democratic Republicans on farming. Federalists are pro-British. Democratic Republicans pro-France. The Federalist supporters are mostly the upper middle class, lawyers, merchants, manufacturers, and the clergy, while the lower classes like farmers and most of the lower middle class and tradespeople support the Democratic Republicans. And what happens when you get to John Adams, president number 2, elected in 1796, which was the first presidential election with political parties. And what you have is John Adams, the Federalist, versus Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican. Adams ends up winning. But what's really fascinating at this time is the person who won the most votes at the Electoral College became president, and the one with the second amount of votes became vice president. Can you imagine having a Democrat or a Republican president and having the opposite political party as the vice president? Oh boy, wouldn't that be entertaining to watch? Well, at the very least, I'd be entertained. May not be very happy, but it'd be entertaining. And Adams is also the first president to govern from Washington, D.C., and also the first president to only have one term in office. So the first thing is when Washington left office, we were having issues with Britain and France. Britain and France were at war like they always are, and France kept taking American ships because they wanted us to stop trading with Britain. So our ships tried to protect ourselves with our little rinky-dink navy. Didn't really work out very well. We call this the Quasi-War. And what happens is Adams sends over 3 delegates to France to negotiate. In particular, they were put in a hotel. And if you remember, these at this time, France was going through their revolution. So it was constantly governments going in and out of favor, in and out of power, and they're just completely ignored for weeks on end. But France finally begins to send some agents, and they named X, Y, and Z to discuss the treaty. But before we even got there, these agents begin to ask for a bribe of $250,000, $250,000 just to talk. And we're like, aren't you supposed to be our friends, France? Didn't we have this whole treaty thing going on since before we were even in our country? So the United States, of course, is going to be like, no, not a sixpence. No, I'm not giving you any money. And this becomes known as the XYZ affair. And this is going to enrage the Americans because we're like, what right does our ally to say, no, you must give me money first before you do anything? So what ends up happening is this enrages, and they cancel the treaties with France, all of our trade treaties, all that idea, and we decided to start saving up money to slowly build up our army and navy. As John Adams once stated, we must build our wooden walls. So from there, we get to the Alien and Sedition Acts. And when this was passed, this was because there was a conflict let me restart. So this starts as what is known as the Necessary and Proper Clause. And this uses the Necessary, Proper, and Elastic Clause that stretches out the national government's power. So what happens is because of this conflict with France, it made the Federalists really popular with the people because they don't like France. But the Democratic Republicans in Congress, even though they weren't in charge of Congress at the time, decided to fight back through their people in Congress and through the press, which the Democratic Republicans mostly owned. And Adams, being John Adams, really couldn't deal with this type of issues. He did not have the personality to deal with a lot of these conflicts and personal attacks in particular. So he became angered and started blaming the press and brand new immigrants for these attacks on the media because they're like, hey, the immigrants vote mostly for Democratic Republicans, so I hate them. And anyone who is going to be seditious, or what we say at the very bottom, number 3, saying or writing anything false or harmful about the government. So the Alien Sedition Acts did 3 major things. First thing, increased time to become a citizen from 5 to 14 years. An immigration problem or sedition problem. I wonder if we're ever going to see that again in American politics. Number 2, President got the power to arrest aliens or immigrants who he considered disloyal or loyal and order them out of the country. He more or less said, I don't like what you said about me, so go away. And he also outlawed the idea of sedition, which is saying or writing anything false or harmful about the government. What? So this mostly attacked John Adams' enemies. Went after the people who he disliked who were not Federalist. And this also suppressed the right of freedom of speech and the press. This is kind of scary. So from there, the Democratic Republicans fought back by using a theory known as states' rights. And in particular, Virginia and Kentucky passed resolutions that said you cannot tell us that we can limit this because the states have the right to say whatever they want. Because I am a state, I have certain rights that cannot be stamped on over the national government. And this is a conflict of states' rights that are going to continue all the way through modern times. We still have this conflict. Should states have certain rights? Do they have the right to do this? Do they not? And it's going to be a thing that we're going to be dealing with for, well, at least up to modern times, for the whole time we've been here. Then we get to the midterm elections. And this is the time when the president is elected, but not the president. Excuse me, Congress is not elected, but not the president. This is every 2 years. So it goes election, midterm, this type of deal. And what happens is because so many people were upset with John Adams and in particular the Alien Sedition Acts, because most people have said, no, I have the right to say whatever I want, as long as it doesn't bring harm upon people. I can say you like boogers and you eat them. And there's nothing you can do. But John Adams, I throw you in jail. I kick you out of the country. So Congress becomes controlled by the Democratic Republicans, who immediately begin to repeal or let expire parts of the Alien Sedition Acts. They're like, no, we dislike this. Let's get rid of it. Because remember, Congress passed the laws, not the president. President only enforces or gives ideas. So from there, we end up with peace with France. Adams in the Convention of 1800 and agrees that France will stop attacking American vessels. They are going to allow us to be neutral in their issues. They're going to allow us to trade. But this is going to make Federalists angry because they're like, no, we want to fight France. I don't like them. I like Britain. So now John Adams has an issue. The Federalists don't like him because of making peace with France because of the quasi-war. And the Democratic Republicans don't like him because he tried to ban free speech and made it harder for immigrants, who mostly vote Democratic Republicans, to become citizens so that they can vote. So, yeah, Adams is going to have a little bit of a difficulty trying to get reelected in 1800. And we're going to find out what happens later. So before you leave, though, here's your question that you need to put down in the doobly-doo or the discussion board. So if you were alive in the 1790s to early 1800s, which political party, the Democratic Republicans or the Federalists, would you support and why? And remember to use the information that you either learned through here or through your own research outside. And as always, don't forget to be awesome.